Welcome into today's episode of With the First Pick. I, of course, am not Ryan Wilson. Ryan is on ice, quite literally. He is unfortunately dealing with a wisdom tooth, going to have surgery on it. And so, obviously, with that, will not be able to host the With the First Pick pod this week. So I'm joined, Mike Renner, joined by Josh Edwards, fellow draft analyst here. And Josh, I got to ask you, how many days until the NFL draft? Do you know?
I hope you're prepared. I thought about this, that I should be prepared. I was like, oh, Ryan's not on. I'm not going to have to look it up. So I was not prepared.
I don't have the handy clock behind me to say it, but it's 51 days until the NFL draft. We are nearing the 50 mark, getting close to it, and we're obviously past now probably the last big hurdle in the NFL draft process. Obviously, every individual pro day will be massive for their respective athletes, but this is the last time that we have a thing to point to that we can create content off of. So darn it, we're going to create some content off of it. We're going to give you guys our winners, and I don't want to say losers. I want to say disappointers from the NFL Combine, because the more we say losers, the more people pull out. The more guys we list that had disappointments, the more guys we're just not going to see test in the future, unfortunately, because we're even seeing it now. A lot of positions were like barren wastelands out there in Indy when it came to the drills. A lot of guys opting out. A conversation for another time, though. So let's get into the winners. Josh, kick us off for us. Who you got as one of your biggest winners of the NFL Combine?
Yeah, I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball with Kentucky cornerback Maxwell Hairston. Obviously a slight player, so you kind of needed him to run fast, and he more than checked that box. We're going to talk about a few guys later that may have been considered disappointments because of what they did not run. But Hairston backed it up. He said he was going to put on a show, and he certainly did. Ran a 4.28 official 40-yard dash, which was the fastest time of the entire combine. Certainly not the type of speed we saw this past year with Xavier Worthy setting the record with a low 4.2, but 39.5-inch vertical jump. I think he really helped himself. He looked really fluid throughout the drills. His angles were concise coming out of breaks. I just thought he had a great overall workout. I think he's somebody that helped himself tremendously. I think we're talking about a player that went from probable top 50 to probable top first round at this point in time. And you're looking at teams in the back half of the first round that need cornerback help. You're talking about the Commanders. You're talking about the Bills. You're talking about the Chiefs. There's a number of teams that could use a player of his caliber. And, I think he's somebody that is now firmly in the mix because of what he accomplished in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think he has to be one of the biggest risers. I'm not terribly surprised at the numbers, though. I think I said this before. He made up ground on Isaiah Bond. And Isaiah Bond said he was going to go in the 4.2s. He did not. He's not going to be one of the biggest risers on this. But his max miles per hour was one of the fastest of anyone there per next-gen stats. And, well, Maxwell Hairston was faster than him on tape. So that's a good trait to have when you're a cornerback. On my board, so I had a top 50 board prior to the combine. He was not on it. He is now checking in at number 48 as my post-combine board. I just don't think that it solves all his ills, right? Like, we knew he was a good athlete. Right. We don't know how physical he can be with NFL wide receivers. He's only 183 pounds. He is not a big cornerback. We'll check the next level. But when you're young, when you have the ball production he did as a sophomore already, when he had 5 picks, I think there's a lot to like about his game. So I do agree that with the numbers he put up, yeah, you feel pretty good about that guy being a top 50 or so corner in this upcoming draft. All right, my guy, Ryan had a bunch of names here that he wrote down. I'll highlight the one that I think everyone looked at afterwards and was like, yeah, we knew he was athletic. He even exceeded my high expectations, and it's Nick Emmanwori, the South Carolina safety. This guy at 6'3", 220 pounds, ran a 4.38 40, jumped 43 inches, and had an 11.6 broad jump. I don't know if you like relative athletic score, Josh, math bombs thing, Kent Lee Platt. 10.0, the most athletic safety. Now, that's before the change of direction drills. So we'll see what he does in the 3-cone and the short shuttle at his pro day. But he did all that, and he also did 20 bench press reps. The guy is about as explosive, not about as, he is the most explosive safety prospect probably in NFL history at this point. The worrisome name, though, when you look at these numbers, Obi Melifonwu. I don't know if you remember him. He was the OG combine GOAT at the safety position. Very similar numbers. But when I flip on his tape versus Obi's tape was like man, hopefully he figures out like the physical aspect of playing safety. Hopefully he wants to like start hitting people at some point. With Nick, you like this guy likes to hit people. I have no question about that. So I was kind of hesitant to really put him in the first round before this, but watching his tape, seeing how freakish this guy is, it's like that's what a first round safety looks like. And I heard people whispering that he could even overtake Malaki Starks as the first safety off the board.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that because Starks obviously is not as big. He didn't test as well, but we've had this conversation almost on a yearly basis with some pretty productive players. I mean, Brian Branch is a guy that I think people probably overthought throughout the process. Just this past year, Cooper DeJean was somebody that fell down the draft board. So, do you feel like it is warranted for Emmanwori to potentially surpass Starks, or do you feel like it's maybe handled on a team by team basis?
I do think it's team by team. Some teams really buy into traits. Some teams really bet on where a guy could go. They get him in their system. I don't think Starks' traits are bad, though. 4-5 at
Right.
safety is not bad. It's obviously not elite. And, first round, you chase elite more often than not. But his tape is so much better than Emmanwori's. Like his tape is
100%.
awesome. It truly is. And the Brian Branch comp, I think, is opt. And Branch was even a worse athlete from a testing perspective than Starks was. So I am truly not worried about Malaki Starks. All you need to know in the graphic that they showed during the on-field drills, I think was as enlightening as any, who had the fastest speed in every single on-field drill, every single one. It was Malaki Starks amongst the safeties. That the guy plays fast. He plays football the right way. So I'm still leaning to that, but that's not taking anything away from Emmanwori. I think afterwards, after the combine, he moved up all the way to number 21 on my top 50. I think that guy's going to be a player when it's all said and done. All right, you got one
Yeah.
more for us here before we go to break?
Yeah, Darien Porter. Let's just keep it in the secondary.
Worse.
From Iowa State, a guy that made the transition to defensive back just a couple of years ago. He's had some talented players in front of him over the past couple of years, but nearly 6'3", 195 pounds, certainly looks the part of a long, rangy cornerback. 4.3 in the 40-yard dash with a 1.49 second 10-yard split. So you see the long speed, but you also see the quickness. His ability to build speed quickly with that 10-yard split. So I thought it was a really encouraging day for him. He's somebody that I thought was probably, back end of day two to, potentially getting himself into the top 50 because it's a relatively weak cornerback class. I think, Trey Amos is somebody that's going to be in that conversation as well. But, and again, just touching on some of those teams that have needs at the cornerback position. Teams like the Chiefs, team like the Bills, they've always targeted those long cornerbacks. And I think Porter is going to be somebody that is certainly atop their board after what he did in Indianapolis.
What I love about Porter's testing too, this wasn't just, a 40 broad vertical guy. Like when you're really explosive, you crush those three. And then, Nick Emmanwori opted out of the 3-cone, opted out of the shuttle. Shamar Stewart opts out of the 3-cone, opts out of the shuttle. He didn't opt out of the 3-cone or the shuttle.
No.
He crushed the 3-cone and the shuttle. 6.71 and a 4.04 are elite times in those respective drills for a man 6'3", 195 pounds. So it's not just that guy can really roll in a straight line. We all knew that. It's the true all-around athleticism that I think makes Porter special. And yeah, if I'm going the guys we just talked about here, him and Maxwell Hairston, it's going to be a debate because he's so much older, but he is like put together almost in a lab what you would want a cornerback to look like at the next level. It's just the tackling. It is just the tackling at this point. It's certain schemes. If you're playing a lot of press man, you can get away with it. Pretty much anywhere else, it's like he's going to have to learn how to tackle. So going to be one of the more intriguing prospects to watch. But there were 3 guys that had perfect 10 RASs. He was at a 9.99. So that guy, I think the second best testing athlete at the cornerback position all time. And he did every single drill besides the bench press. So not a lot more that's hidden in his profile. The guy is just a freak of nature. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Actually, let me just touch on, Ryan had one more. He had Jahdae Barron, Texas corner. And he wasn't, a freak of nature the way some of the other guys we talked about. But for a first-round cornerback, this is what you want him to test like. You want him to run a 4.3. You ran a 4.39. You want him to jump well, 35-inch vert, 10.3 broad jump. You just want him to be a good high-end athlete because Jahdae doesn't really win with athleticism on tape. Now, obviously, like He does, but he's not just getting hyped because of athleticism. It's how he plays the game. The guy is physical. The guy has, great instincts. He breaks on balls with such confidence, and has seen so much in his career at Texas that he goes to the combine and does that. I think he's put himself in real position to be the second cornerback off the board, in my opinion, depending on how you view Travis Hunter. But Travis Hunter is going to be the first. And then it's between him and Will Johnson. And if Will Johnson doesn't test well, I could see teams leaning towards this guy because the tape's better this last fall. The athleticism is better. And if Will Johnson's not going to test and he still has the turf toe and whatever, I just could see Jahdae being second cornerback off the board. Do you think that's crazy? Or am I going too far based off the testing numbers? Or is this a real conversation at this point?
I think it's a real conversation just because of what we've seen. If Will Johnson Jr. had come out and he'd ran a fast 40-yard dash time, it would be easier for me to explain away the 2024 tape. Because 2023 was so much better. I thought he was, certainly going to be a top 10 pick. 2024 was just not what we had seen the year prior. So if we had seen the long speed from Johnson the way that we had hoped, I think he probably would have solidified himself as that second cornerback. But because he did not test, I think Barron is certainly in the mix to be that second cornerback off the board. And just kind of working my way around the media sessions the day that the cornerback spoke, few players impressed the way that Jahdae Barron did. I mean, he's an incredibly mature player. He's professional. I like the way that he carried himself. So he's going to check those boxes in interviews with teams as well.
Yeah, not a lot to dislike about his game at this point. But one thing to note, 29 5/8 inch arms. Not a lot of guys go first round with sub 30-inch arms. I think the last one was Trent McDuffie. And obviously, though,
pretty good player.
It's like that's kind of how I feel about him, where it's just like the tape's good enough, the athlete's good enough. We're not too worried about the arm length at this point. All right, we're going to take a quick break. After that, going to get to a few more winners. And then at the end, we're going to touch on the disappointments. But coming up next,
gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
All right, who's next up on your winners list, Josh?
I went with Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden. He was a player that had a lot of steam throughout this process, even coming into the combine, but running a 4.29 in the 40-yard dash showed a speed that we hadn't seen on tape, which I think is something that a lot of people are going to have to go back and try to ascertain whether what we saw in Indianapolis was the real deal or what we had seen on tape. And a lot of people are traditionally going to stick to the tape, but I think it certainly at least illuminates the fact that he could potentially have a higher ceiling as a wide receiver, and to the point where people are asking if he's going to be wide receiver 1 in this draft class, at least beyond Travis Hunter. Again, we always have to put that asterisk because Travis Hunter is going to factor into the cornerback conversation. He's going to factor into the wide receiver conversation as well. But I think he's going to be in the mix for that wide receiver 1. I think it just depends on what that team that is taking the first wide receiver is looking for, because they're totally different body types. Ted McMillan is somebody that has greater size. He's somebody that can win down the field. Matthew Golden is 5'11", 195 pounds or whatever he measured in at. So they're different body frames, and I think whichever team is ultimately going to take that first wide receiver, it just kind of depends what they're looking for, which is ultimately off the board. But I think Golden helped himself tremendously. I'm thinking maybe Pittsburgh. I'm thinking maybe Dallas, San Francisco, New Orleans. Some of the teams that have a need at wide receiver, those could possibly be in the range for Golden.
Have you seen the conspiracy theories though around Golden's
No.
40 time? That it wasn't actually, if you do go frame by frame on it, his clock start was quite a bit later than most guys' clock starts.
Really?
Yes. So because every single person I've talked to about it, every single one, exact same take. And I cannot remember a guy running the 4.2s and people being like, whoa, that guy ran the 4.2s. Like every single person I've talked to is like, he ran the 4.2s. 4.2 speed, like you see it. 4.2 speed shows up on tape consistently.
I love a good conspiracy theory. I hadn't seen that one, but
But if you go check out, there's some videos of people really like frame by framing it. It's still fast, right? You're not.
Yeah.
This isn't like, but it may have been a juice 40. We'll just say.
Interesting.
Still though, getting a 2 instead of a 3 next year, Nate, or even next to a 4, which I thought he was going to be in the 4s. That's going to help your draft stock. And I do think he is firmly going to be a first rounder after that, because the guy runs routes so well. He really is a very high floor, even if I didn't think his ceiling was what the 4.29 might suggest. All right, my next one here. I'll go another wide receiver, because I didn't expect this guy to test this well. Apparently Ryan didn't either. He wrote down Jalen Royals, the Utah State wide receiver, guy who had a monster year this past fall before getting injured, over 800 yards in 7 games, 6 foot, 205, and he ran a 4.42 40 with a 1.49 split. That's moving, man. I thought he was a guy who was going to be a riser at the Senior Bowl. Now, maybe he wasn't fully healed from his injury, maybe whatever at that point in time, but didn't really stand out at a high level the way I thought he did on tape. I was a much better player on tape than I saw at the Senior Bowl. But if you run a 4.42 at that size, given what he put on tape, I think he's going to be a player. He moved up my board quite a bit as well after that. Now, again, I only did a top 50, but now he checks in at number 64. So that would be right at the back end of the second round is where I see him. And truthfully, he could even go higher than that at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that, late second round, early third round is kind of where I saw him. And I've kind of held firm on his stock because I thought he was that player in 2023. Of course, the injuries played a role in ultimately where he's been projected to this point. But I was happy to see what he did in Indianapolis because, like you said, it kind of, reestablished his stock a little bit as that day 2 type of wide receiver. And again, I think there's an opportunity for a player like him to make a lot of money because there's not really a set pecking order in terms of these wide receivers. There's so many different skill sets. And I think it's really going to come down by, how each team views the position. I think he's somebody that could go earlier than what many have expected. And that's going to translate to a lot of money for him. So I'm happy to see what he did there on the field this week.
You actually had a winner up next who I kind of saw in a similar vein to Royals heading in, that I think I actually moved him up even more than I moved up Royals. And he's actually in my top 50 if you're talking the Iowa State wide receiver.
Yeah, this isn't an Iowa State podcast. We're going to talk about 3 of them here as winners, but I promise we do watch other teams. It just so happens that Jayden Higgins, 6'4", 214 pounds, had an 80-inch wingspan. That's been a thing that a lot of people think of because when you're talking about the windows in the NFL, they get very tight. So when you see a wide receiver that, has sub 77-inch wingspan, the ball has to be on point. You can't have this inaccurate quarterback that's distributing the football. But when you have a guy like Higgins who has that monstrous wingspan, you have a little bit more room for error. Somebody that's got a little bit more range to go get the football. But he came out, he ran a 4.47 in the 40-yard dash. And then similar to Porter, I thought his quickness, his agility drills were better than what I had anticipated coming in. He ran a 1.53 10-yard split, had a 39-inch vertical as well. So he's somebody that I'm going to have to go back and watch the tape on because I didn't quite see that. But he's somebody that certainly helped himself through this draft process.
Yeah, he cracked my top 50 after this. I really liked his tape. I saw him as more of a possession-y type of wide receiver because of that size. But those are the traits of a guy who can beat NFL corners down the football field. Because I saw him beating college corners, but I'm like, does he really have that kind of juice? 4.47 with those jumps is real deal juice. And he has that's a wingspan that's over 2 inches bigger than Tet McMillan, who everyone sees as like this big catch radius, contested catch guy at the next level. Jayden Higgins has a big wingspan, and height is important at the next level. Wingspan's more important. You want the guys who have long arms to play outside their frame, because there's only so often where you have to really reach up for something, but a lot of times you got to reach out. And with Jayden Higgins, a lot of times when he had to reach out, he wasn't dropping those passes. So big fan of this game. I think he made himself some money.
He looked really good through the gauntlet too. Somebody that just looked poised, in control the whole time. He looked every bit ready for the moment. And, I think he helped himself.
All right. You go ahead next, because I don't love Ryan's other winners here. He went Charles Grant as one of his winners. Charles Grant didn't even test. Well, Ryan just had to bring up a William and Mary guy. I think he just wanted to give him some love.
That's exactly right. He's a William and Mary guy. Ryan had to get him in there, shoehorn him in there. I had a couple of names. Jalen Noel from Iowa State. We've talked a lot about Iowa State guys, but I think he did well at the Senior Bowl. I think he capitalized on his moment at the Combine as well. So I think he helped himself. But uh, because we do watch other teams, I will say Bhayshul Tuten, the running back from Virginia Tech, is a player that I thought really helped himself. And it was very difficult to set yourself apart among this running back group because we know Ashton Genty is, potentially the top running back in this class. Amarian Hampton from North Carolina, I thought separated himself as that number 2 running back. But I think there's an opportunity for some jockeying there among that next group of runners. And I think Tuten helped himself in that conversation. He came out, he had a 40-yard dash in 4.32 seconds, 1.49 10-yard split, 40.5-inch vertical jump, and then the second best broad jump among the running backs, which is a 10 foot 10. So tested really well in Indianapolis. And I think just combined with adequate size for the position, he's somebody that helped himself a lot at the Combine.
Yeah, I think he did. I think a lot of these running backs did, man. I was very impressed.
Yeah.
We've been hyping it up all draft season long. It's a great class. It's a great class. You can find, if you want a starter in the 3rd round, there will be a starter for you. And I think it only proved that with their testing at the Combine. I thought RJ Harvey, the UCF running back, running a 4.4 was an awesome time for him, given his play style. I thought Trevor Etienne going 4.42 was great for him. I thought Quinshon Judkins testing was incredible with a 4.48 and then the best jumps of anyone in attendance at the running back position. He had a broad jump of 11 feet, 38.5-inch vertical. That's the kind of explosive athlete you want. And then I thought Damian Martinez running a 4.51 was
him. Yeah.
great for him. I mean, he's a big power back, lumberer on tape. Did not see 4.51 speed, but and with 35-inch vertical and 10.4 broad jump, that's a guy that can continue to break tackles at a high level once he gets to the NFL. So really not a lot of disappointments in the running back class. Maybe we'll get to them here in a little bit, but I was very impressed with how the running backs fared down in Indy.
Yeah, and I think Martinez going from Oregon State to Miami this offseason, I thought he showed improvements in pass protection as well, which had been one of my concerns of him coming into the year. It was top end speed, which you noted that he checked that box in Indianapolis, but the pass protection as well. I thought he did a much better job this year. So he's a player that's moving back up the board in my eyes. We can turn this into a Guys Naming Dudes podcast because I thought Taj Brooks did really well.
Yes.
Rashard Smith had good speed. Like, the running back class is so deep that, you mentioned getting a starter on round 3. I think you could get into day 3 and potentially get a starter out of this class. It's so deep. So it's an incredibly fun group. I was excited to see how they were going to stack up because it was just one guy after another that, is that potential top 100 overall pick. And they certainly did not disappoint.
Yeah, I think there's really only 2 backs who came in and I was like, probably not their best, who were getting some semblance of hype. Caleb Johnson, the Iowa running back. I don't think a 4.57 is,
No.
For a guy who was getting 1st round hype, you're not drafting a 4.57 type of guy in the 1st round, in my opinion. And then the other one being Ollie Gordon. It's basically been the whole last year has been a free fall for this guy after he put up one of the best sophomore seasons we've seen at the running back position. 4.61, only a 34.5-inch vert and 10-foot broad jump. Yes, he's a bigger back, but those are pretty pedestrian times for a guy who did not have a good season. So unfortunately, those 2 are the only ones that really come to mind in terms of disappointers, but everyone else, it seemed like, who tested well, they probably made themselves some money. Now you got one more for us, I believe, in the winners category before we're forced to move on to the disappointers. Who you got for us?
I thought that Terrance Ferguson looked good. The tight end from Oregon. I was probably a little bit lower on him than some other people in this draft class. But I thought he helped himself. He certainly looks the part. 6'5", 3/8, 247 pounds, 40-yard dash in 4.63 seconds. I thought he looked good through the drills as well. More crisp than maybe I had given him credit for. I don't think he's a top 50 pick at this point. I think there's some tight ends that are more deserving of that. Mason Taylor, who I did not put on this list, but I think made the case to be 1st round. I thought he looked very good through the drills at the tight end position. But I think Ferguson helped himself a lot too, to where we're now talking about him possibly getting into that top 100 conversation.
Yeah, I don't think many tight ends have had a better pre-draft than him. I think he probably had the best between the Senior Bowl, where he looked great in the one-on-ones. He didn't do a ton of them, but looked great when he did. And then now this, where most of the top tight ends didn't test. Like you said, mentioned Mason Taylor. I thought he's had a good pre-draft process, but he did not test in terms of the athletic drills. He did the on-field stuff. Colson Loveland's hurt, didn't test. Tyler Warren didn't test. Like a lot of the guys we want to see in this tight end class, Elijah Arroyo didn't test, unfortunately. So he kind of came to the cream of the crop in terms of he had the fastest 40, he had the best broad, he had the highest vertical. It's like that. When you can go out and do that and then do what he did at Senior Bowl, he checked in my latest big board. I did the update, 58th now, and is just moving up. I really like his game as a receiver. Obviously, work to be done as a blocker, but to me, that's what like a actual receiving threat looks like at the tight end position when you're projecting the next level. I think that guy can actually run routes in a way that, your Gunnar Helms of the world can't, unfortunately. And we'll get to him here in a second. And when we go to the disappointer. So we'll take a quick break. After that, it's going to be somber, but we're going to get to the guys who didn't test as well as we thought they would be compared to expectations.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
All right, kick us off, Josh. Who you got for us in the disappointers list?
Yeah, this one comes with a little bit of an asterisk. I went with Texas wide receiver Isaiah Bond, and mostly it's because he came out and told us he was going to run a 4.1 or 4.2. He was going to break Xavier Worthy's record set in the 40-yard dash last year. Of course, he came out and ran a 4.42 unofficially the first time, and everybody's like, what is going on? Because we'd already seen it at that point from Jayden Blue, his teammate at Texas, who had made a similar proclamation. But he ultimately ran a 4.39 second, official in the 40-yard dash, which is very fast. If we didn't have any context of, I'm going to run a 4.1, I'm going to run a 4.2, then we would have been very happy with a 4.39 because that's more than fast enough to be a wide receiver in the NFL. But I thought Bond just kind of lost steam throughout the process, throughout the season, to the point where he's kind of been passed up in the pecking order by some of these other wide receivers. And then to run, a 4.39 after making the proclamation that he was going to run a 4.1 or 4.2 is ultimately why I put him on a loser list, even though he technically wasn't a loser. But he also reached 24.17 miles per hour in the 40-yard dash, which I think was the second fastest among all performers. So he's a very fast player, but certainly didn't live up to the billing that he had declared on stage days earlier.
Yeah, I said I wasn't going to call these guys losers, but my biggest losers are the guys that all said they were going to run 4.1 and then don't even break 4.3. Like and I think also
I don't get it. I just don't get
Stewart's
it.
like, I'm going to run a 4.4 and then he ran a 4.59. It's like there's really no benefit to going out. I like the way Nick Nash did it. He said, if I break 4.6, I'll be happy. Runs like a 4.58. It's like say if I do XYZ, I'll be happy, and then like put it in a realistic range. So if you're Isaiah Bond, come there, set the expectations low, be like, I'd love to run the 4.4s. And then when you go out there and run a 4.39, all of a sudden everyone's like, ooh, he ran a 4.39? We thought this guy was going to run the 4.4s. If you say 4.1, 4.39 looks like poop, dude. It doesn't look, you set the expectations too high. Come on. Get the agents in these guys' ear and tell them to set expectations low next year. Those are the guys who I will call losers. But yeah, Isaiah Bond, if you're just buying into, and I think at this point you almost have to just buy into him being a freak athlete, because on tape there's not enough production to point to and be like, I can buy into this. He needed to test like a true freak of nature, and good athlete, not the kind that you're really going to go to bat for with all the other stuff that's going on with him. All right, I'll give one here that Ryan gave, and I agree with Ryan here. I think a lot of people are calling this guy a winner after his athletic testing, and it was good. Will Campbell, the LSU OT. I'm not going to debate that. But coming in with a wingspan at just over 6'5" when he is a 6'6" offensive tackle, a wingspan that's quite literally shorter than his height, which you almost never see. It's a complete rarity on a football field because of how big and broad these guys are. He ain't going to be a tackle at the next level. I would almost guarantee at this point, because he would have the shortest wingspan of any offensive tackle in the NFL the day he hits the ground. And it's just, everyone wants to talk about arm length. But wingspan's far more impactful because wingspan is where you can get to. Think about if you're a pencil with 35-inch arms, you can't get to anything. You don't have a width. It doesn't matter that your arms are long. You're not getting to anyone. So if you have really thin shoulders with then also pretty short arms, your ability to just find things in space is so limited compared to the guy who has a 7-foot wingspan, even if he's not as athletic as Will Campbell is. So I think, he's still going to be a darn good NFL player, but I would be very hard pressed to draft this guy in the top 10 and play him at offensive tackle. I think that's just not his best position at this point.
I still wouldn't be surprised if a team gave him a chance at left tackle, but I ultimately think that he probably will make that transition. And to his credit, on the podium this week, he did say, I'm open to doing that if that's what a team feels is the best path forward for me. So I understand listing him as a loser as an offensive tackle, because historically that lack of length is not going to hold up in the NFL. I mean, he does things on tape that allows him to offset that a little bit. But if you're a team that already has an outlier at guard or center, you already have a few outliers, you can't afford to take another one. And I think that's going to be the conversation for a lot of teams. But at the same time, I think he was a big winner as an offensive guard, because of how well he did test, because of what he did on the on-field portion of the event. I thought he looked really good, except, when he did the splits that one time. But he did bounce back. He had a good event after that. So, there was a lot to like, but I think you guys are right. Just as an offensive tackle, having that lack of length, is really going to hurt him as an offensive tackle in the projection moving forward, especially when you've got Armand Membou, who, checked that box, has certainly risen throughout the process.
Yeah. The other two, Banks, Membou, the other tackles getting that kind of hype, both over 33-inch arms, both tested pretty well. Membou tested elite. So yeah, I do think that if you're looking for a tackle, teams in the top 10, that's probably what you're looking for if you're drafting the top 10. I think teams will go. I don't think they'll covet Will Campbell like that. I just don't anymore, unfortunately. All right, who you got next?
So I went with Cam Skattebo, the running back from Arizona State. He did not test, but he's on the list as a loser for some of the reasons that we've already talked about earlier. And again, I'll say it's a disappointment because he's not really a loser in the grand scheme of things. It was a situation that was out of his control. But I thought the running backs that did take the field and that did perform did a fantastic job, to the point where, his position among that hierarchy could have potentially taken a hit, and it translates to a lot of money over the course of a rookie contract. So when you've got players like Damian Martinez and, potentially RJ Harvey and some of these other guys rising up the boards, Skattebo is somebody that could have been hurt in that conversation, and, financially could prove to be a lot in the course of a rookie contract.
Yeah, I do think in this running back class, if you didn't test, you may have been losing ground. And so we'll see what he does at his pro day. I don't think anyone expects him to be fast, though. So I get why he didn't run. He also is a loser in that he got served papers right on the eve of the combine relating to a golf cart accident like a few years prior. So he had a bad week for a number of different reasons there. I'll go with
what is it with papers and charges being served at the NFL Combine? We had it with Jalen Carter. Now it's Skattebo. It's just this unnecessary trend.
I think it's an easy. They know where you're going to be.
True.
It's like it's an easy identifying location. You don't have to stake them out. You're going to say, "I will wait at the entrance, and I'll see him and give him the papers." Because Kyle Long on the pod today was talking about he got served papers at the combine too, relating to something. So it's apparently not an isolated incident here.
So what I'm taking from this is, if you're in legal trouble, you just got to say you have COVID. You can't show up. That's what you got to do moving forward.
Well, I don't think these guys even know they're in legal trouble. Like they just get it's a lawsuit that they never knew was filed against them, and that's why they're getting served there at the combine. So, kind of ridiculous though to think about. All right, my next one. Ryan wrote Gunnar Helm. I don't want to crush Gunnar Helm. Everyone's crushed Gunnar Helm, and he blew his ankle up doing the 40-yard dash. So we had to harp on him. I'm going to go a little different route. I'm going to go with Tyler Booker, because another guy who's vying to be a first-round offensive lineman, and his tape at guard's awesome. At guard's not necessarily the position where you need to be a freak athlete to succeed in the NFL. It's one of the least, athletically based in terms of translating to the next level. But he didn't do a darn thing well in terms of the athletic testing. There is no number to point to with what he did to say, yeah, I need that guy as a first round guard. Now, his frame's awesome. That's where he kind of wins, is with this size, strength advantage, super coordinated. He's 6'5", 34.5-inch arms, 11-inch hands. That's like what you would put together for an offensive guard in the NFL, 321 pounds. But you see that 40 time, and even more so, those jumps are just not explosive jumps. 7'10" broad jump, 27-inch vertical, two of the worst figures in both those. Change of direction numbers also poor, and it's not like he made it up with some impressive upper body strength. 21 bench reps is fairly pedestrian by offensive line standards. So, again, I still think he's a first round offensive guard, but he fell down my board a little bit just because you still want to bet on good athletes. If it's a first round pick, you still prefer the guys who have first round traits, and those are not first round athletic traits. So I dropped him down my board just a touch into the 20s, but still love his tape. Just that's not what you're looking for if you're going to bat for a guy who getting sort of top 13, top 15 hype.
Yeah, I agree with you. The tape is very good. He's very consistent. He's played a lot of football at Alabama. He's physical. By all accounts, he interviewed well with teams, but he just did not have the athletic profile that you would hope to see from a potential first-round pick. So, especially when some of these other guys were coming out and testing the way that they did, because I thought the offensive linemen just as a group did really well to wrap up the combine experience this year. I don't think Booker is going to lose stock or projection or whatever, as you noted. But I do think that teams are going to look at that and say, man, I wish he would have done a little bit better. If we're going to be comfortable taking him in the first round, I wish he would have done this and this and this. But we just did not see that from him. So teams are truly going to have to rely on the tape for him. And I think the tape is still very good.
Okay. Who's your next one for disappointing?
I went with Tez Johnson. And again, it's just, he's an outlier. Historically, he's an outlier. He comes in 154 pounds, dating back to 1989. There have only been 7 wide receivers that were lighter. The 33rd team noted that no wide receiver under 170 pounds, which is still 16 pounds more than what Johnson weighed in, has run a slower 40-yard dash, which was 4.51 seconds. You expected him to run a lot faster, and he did not do that. At the same time, where I kind of put the asterisk on it is he ran the fastest 3-cone drill. He ran 6.65 seconds in the 3-cone. So you still see that agility. It just doesn't add up the way that we would have expected his combine performance to ultimately play out. And I don't think it's going to hurt him in the grand scheme of things. I'm sure he'll test at his pro day and everything will be fine, similar to what Audric Estime did this, last year. But I think just historically, he has to be considered a disappointment because a player that light has never ran a slower 40-yard dash time.
Yeah, I was also surprised by it. The obvious comp for him is Tank Dell. That's your best case scenario with the guy in that mold. And on tape, I thought he was faster than Tank Dell. I was like, yeah, he plays just a touch, like just a little bit tuned up, a little bit faster than Tank Dell. And he ran slower than Tank Dell. So that one was surprising. And I do agree that, he's getting top 100 hype. His tape is top 100 in my opinion, but 154 pounds and also tests like that. It's like, you're just going to be hard pressed to see someone really go to bat from. I didn't drop him down much though, because I know his GPS times, they are still very, very good. They do not match 4.51 speed. So I'm not too worried about it. I will trust more what I saw on tape. And my disappointers here, Ryan has a couple names down: Nick Nash, Kanata Mumfield. I think there's this group of day 3-ish wide receivers that I was hoping to kind of jockey for position in this draft class. One guy I really liked on tape, Ricky White. I think he's a unique athlete in what he does, the UNLV wide receiver. He had a bad combine. You can be skinny or you can be slow at wide receiver. You cannot be both skinny and slow. He is that. 184 pounds at 6'1". He's a stick. 4'6", 140. He's slow. That's not a good combination. So that being said, I thought Ricky White could have made his way in the top 100 if he ran really well, tested well, maybe came in a little bit bigger than that. That's a guy who's going to be a late day 3 pick at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah, highly productive. Very disappointing combine, and it's hard to square that. Sometimes you're just a better, football player than you are an athlete. But when you're considering the type of what he had at stake in Indianapolis, it just did not leave us wanting more, to the point where you're probably right. That day 3 type of projection where teams are just banking on the production of what he was able to accomplish at UNLV is probably the soft landing spot for him at this point.
All right, let's end with this. We did winners. We did disappointers. Let's do whose pro day are you looking forward to the most amongst the guys that didn't test? Because honestly, we didn't hit a few guys who could even be winners that were like top first round guys that tested really well. But there's a lot of first rounders who did not test. There's a lot of first rounders who did not a darn thing at the combine. So who are you looking forward to seeing the most test at their pro day?
Yeah, mine is easy because I've gone out on a limb for this player for quite some time. I'm going to say Will Johnson Jr., the cornerback from Michigan. Again, I love his 2023 tape, and I want to know that that's the true player and not the player that we saw in 2024 when he was dealing with injuries. But if he's going to come out and he's going to run a slower 40-yard dash, or maybe not even run at all, similar to what Drake London did during his pre-draft process, that's going to raise some red flags. And as we were talking about earlier, if teams are going to have those red flags, then that allows a player like maybe Jahdae Barron to leap him in the pecking order and potentially take the contract that Johnson would have had. So I'm excited to see what he does. I hope he does not let me down, because I'm still holding firm in my 2023 Will Johnson stock.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's answer. Him and Tyler Warren, I think, have real questions about what kind of athlete they are that they need to prove. I'm going to go a little different, though, and I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to do 2 guys. One day one a little lower down the board. I think Walter Nolan from Ole Miss I really want to see, because I watch his tape, and I have like a sky-high grade on him. I there's not a lot of people who are higher on Walter Nolan than me right now. He's 12th on my draft board. I think he is just a special interior penetrator that, can reach that upper echelon that you could really only reach if you got his kind of tools. But what are his kind of tools? His combine prop was set at like 4.8840. I don't know if it's that. Like, I don't know if he is that. He may just be a guy who's, a little more explosive in short area. But if he does go in the 4.8s and does test well, I could bump him up in the top 10 in this class. That's how highly I think of his tape. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him. And I'm also really looking forward to see his teammates. So I got all eyes on the Ole Miss Pro Day, because Jared Ivey is another guy who on tape, I'm just enamored with what he can do from physical.
Me too.
He's 6'5", 285 pounds. And at that size, there's no guy more coordinated in this draft class. His body control, how he uses his hands, he's so effective, but it doesn't take more than a couple plays to realize he's not a high-end athlete. But like, is he a really low-end athlete? I need to know where he is. Obviously, he opted out because it wasn't going to be good. But is it just average, or is it really like dangerously bad territory where, I would take him in the top 50 right now. But again, you don't want to draft bad athletes. So very curious to see where he ends up. So those are the 2 guys I'd highlight.
Yeah, he's one of my guys in this draft class as well. And I think a lot of teams are going to be drawn to him too, because in today's NFL, you're winning more with power off the edge than you are with, that first 2 or 3 step quickness that we've seen from, some other guys that have historically had more success in the past. So he's somebody that I'm very high on. I think if he does test and he tests well, then he's going to rise through this process. Because I think when you see the power, like you said, he's got a little bit more quickness than people give him credit for, moves pretty well. I think he's somebody that's going to end up being taken higher, because that's the profile of pass rusher that's succeeding in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. We see eye to eye on Ivey's tape. And so can't wait to see that. Can't wait for Ryan Wilson to get back healthy too. Hopefully he can talk after that. I had my wisdom teeth out when I was like a teenager. Did you have the same? I feel like
no, I still have mine.
You have
yours. I've
never heard of a 50-plus-year-old man.
No, I haven't either.
So it must be pretty bad. So he's probably going through it right now, but hoping for the best for Ryan. He'll be back next week. And until then, you've been listening to the With First Pick Pod. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.